Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Today we are sitting as the Committee of the Whole. We do have 5 members of council present, as well as representatives from our clerk's department and other staff with us. I should extend a welcome to our newest staff member who started yesterday, Julia Picard. Pingo. There's a story there. Welcome. Township of Hamilton. Oh, I should say 1 o'clock, 1 p.m. as well. Land acknowledgement statement. The Township of Hamilton is situated within the traditional territory of the Mississauga, Anishinaabe, and Chippewa nations, collectively known as the Williams Treaties First Nations. Our work on these lands respectfully acknowledges their resilience and their long-lasting contributions to the area now known as the Township of Hamilton. Item 3 on our agenda. Is there any declaration of pecuniary interest for this meeting today? Seeing none, that shall be recorded. Confirmation of the agenda. Could I have a motion, please, that the Committee of the Whole agenda for November 14th, 2023 be approved? Moved by John, seconded by Bruce. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. Item 5 on our agenda is our floodplain mapping update, presented by Corey Harris. Corey, please come to the counter, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Jib and members of council. It's really a privilege and a treat to be here with you today to talk about floodplain mapping. So I'm Corey Harris. I'm the Watershed Services Coordinator with the Ganaraska Region Conservation Authority. And I have a brief outline here. There's a few things I want to talk about, but I'm going to jump right in with some context. Mapping of floodplains and natural hazards is a delegated responsibility from the province to the conservation authorities. Flood management has 3 pillars that you should be aware of. Number 1 is prevention, 2 is protection, and 3 is emergency response. Having floodplain mapping up to date is really foundational to understanding how the watershed responds to major flood events. But it also goes to that first priority of prevention. If we know what areas are going to flood, that helps us direct new development to areas that won't. So it's pretty important. In 2020, the province produced a flooding strategy, and out of that, it presented 5 priorities. And you'll see, number 1, the top priority is understanding flood risks. So the work that we want to do in updating our mapping within the watershed aligns with the province's priorities as well. You may have heard in recent years there's been some changes to the Conservation Authorities Act. One of those changes is the issuance of Regulation 68621. And what that regulation speaks to is identifying what the mandatory program and service areas are for conservation authorities. So that's just really to ensure that CAs across the province are allocating general levy dollars to the priorities in this regulation. And I just want to point out some text in this section where it talks about CAs are to delineate and map areas of natural hazards within its areas of jurisdiction, study surface water hydrology and hydraulics, including surface water flows and levels, and then also to study the potential effects of climate change on natural hazards. So just a brief word about shoreline hazards. In 2018, GRCA partnered with Central Lake Ontario Conservation Authority as well as Lower Trent. And we partnered to get 135 kilometers of shoreline mapped for flooding and erosion hazards. Out of that, 12 reaches were identified and assessed, and specific recommendations were provided for each of those reaches. One thing they also did was we compared ortho photos or air photos from 1954 to 2018 to look at how much shoreline was lost to erosion, and out of that produce erosion rates to help understand how to deal with erosion along the waterfront. Also, there was a brief item on looking at the impacts of climate change on coastal erosion along the Lake Ontario shoreline. If you haven't read this report or you weren't aware of it, you can download a copy from our website at the link provided there. What does this mapping look like? Well, this is just a sample from Carrs Marsh. So you can see the yellow line work is the 100-year flood level. Blue is the flood hazard limit. Red is the erosion hazard limit. And the pink areas is a feature called dynamic beach hazards. So areas that change significantly during major storm events. So the shoreline is in pretty good shape. It's 2020. When we get to the floodplain mapping, it's not quite the same. This map is depicting all the creeks within the GRCA watershed. And if I point out Hamilton Township here, you can see the features that we're looking at. So this map shows the age, the relative age of mapping. Red is old. It's from the 70s. Not to say if you're from the 70s, you're old. But what it means is the mapping is old enough that we don't actually have a digital model. We have models that are in boxes made of these things. I don't know if you've ever seen one of these. This is a computer punch card. So when I have a consultant call me and say, can you give me the model for Cobourg Creek? And I point them to the box of punch cards. So we can't really do anything with that. We really need to rebuild and recreate these models to have them current and up to date on a regular basis, so that when a bridge gets replaced, we can put that into the model and the mapping is current. It's not to say that the quality of this mapping historically was poor. It was actually well done. It's important to have it in a digital form so you can update it on a regular basis and you're not in a position where you have to rebuild the model in the future. Why are mapping updates important? There's a number of reasons here, and it's really that they have to be current to reflect changes in land use, changes in bridge structures and culverts, because we do provide this mapping not only to our municipal partners, but to their consultants, to the development community. And really, we need these models to be up to date so you can test the impacts of development on flooding and erosion. We also are able to complete risk assessments for culvert and bridge structures. And what I mean by that is when you've got a current model, you can know whether or not a bridge or a culvert is going to flood under a 10-year storm, a 50-year storm, or a 100-year storm. And that's important for guys like Lucas, so that when he's looking at replacing bridges, he can prioritize the ones that aren't meeting certain levels of service. And that then in turn goes into your asset management planning and your capital forecasts. So you can prioritize with some certainty. Also, we use these models to test climate change scenarios. So once the models are built, you can put any kind of storm you want over the specific watershed. So we could put the 2004 Peterborough storm over Cobourg Creek and see what happens. So they're very valuable for that. Plus, we can also use it to test climate change and what that means for the future. So history of available funding. There's been a few different programs over the years. It started out in the 70s with the Flood Damage Reduction Program. That was a provincial and federal partnership. That ended in 96. Then Public Safety Canada came out with the Natural Disaster Mitigation Program in 2015. That ended in 2022. And then Natural Resources Canada has recently come out with the Flood Hazard Identification and Mapping Program. And that started in 2021. When you look at kind of the timeline here of funding, you'll see here there's a 19-year gap where there was no provincial or federal funding for mapping updates. So that was essentially all downloaded to the municipalities. So what's important to note there is when I get asked why is our mapping so old? This is really the reason why. But I'm here with some good news, because we just found out last month that Natural Resources Canada is extending the Flood Hazard Identification and Mapping Program for another 4 years. And they pay 50-50 basically. So if we can find matching dollars at the local level, we can make an application and potentially get 50% from the federal government to offset those costs. We're expecting application intakes to open in the coming months. So we do want to be ready for that. And that gives us 4 years as agencies to get the mapping updated using those federal dollars. Another reason we have to update these maps is that in 2013, Natural Resources Canada updated the National Vertical Datum Standard. And the implication of that is that all of the infrastructure, or most of the infrastructure in Ontario, was done in the 1928 datum. When you're trying to make use of fancy new provincial LiDAR data, which is fantastic, it's all in the new standard. When you compare the new datum levels, they're about 0.3 to 0.4 meters out. And when you're mapping a floodplain, you don't want to be 0.3, 0.4 meters out. You want to be as accurate as possible. So we need to basically update and resurvey all of the existing bridge and culvert structures to get them in that new national standard datum. And we've got a few structures in the watershed. There's over 700. We've been busy at the west end, working with Durham Region as part of some risk assessment work and mapping updates we're doing there. So we've surveyed over 400 structures in the last 2 years. There's another 300 or so in the eastern part of the watershed. So we want to bring that work eastward to get all these structures in the new datum. I've touched on LiDAR data. I think most of you probably know what that is, but it's a remote sensing product where a plane flies over an area. It measures the ground surface with lasers. And out of that, you get point cloud data that you can then process into a digital terrain model. And this is just an example of what that looks like. This is the mouth of the Ganaraska River at Port Hope. So this is gold when you're trying to figure out drainage patterns and delineate subcatchment boundaries and that sort of thing, and then do your actual models. So the purpose of us putting our update implementation plan together is it gives us a bit of structure and approach to do these mapping updates. It identifies a mapping framework and the applicable guidelines that we have to meet. It provides a strategy by reviewing and ranking all watercourse systems in the watershed to identify the priority streams that need attention. It discusses available funding sources and then outlines a preliminary schedule. So we have ranked all of the watercourses in the watershed for basically the vintage of the models and the mapping. We ranked them from 1 to 4. We've also ranked the risk levels for those creek systems from 1 to 4, and we've used this formula to give them a score and then a ranking. So this is the matrix that we've produced. You'll see Hamilton Township's watercourses are in the orange color. So the top scores were for Coburg Creek and Spicer or Covert Creek. So next steps. We're in the process of meeting with municipal partners to figure out what are your priorities for updates, and then also figure out, is there available funding to try and capitalize on those 50% federal funds. So we've started those discussions. We're in the process of developing and finalizing work plans and estimates for all the different creek systems. And we want to try and phase this work over the next 4 years to get all the watersheds up to date. One thing that we're recommending to partners is to consider creating a municipal reserve for this purpose, that once the mapping applications open, that there's a bit of money set aside for this purpose, that we don't have to scramble and find matching funds to try and leverage those to get the 50% federal dollars. So that's really all I had. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Corey. Questions? Larry, please.
Thanks for the presentation. It's great. When you say funding, 50-50, what kind of funding are we talking about here? Is it, hundreds of thousands, or is it?
Oh, in terms of total numbers? Well, just for, I guess, some perspective, we've looked at it for the whole watershed, and I've started breaking down the numbers for each municipality. And I should preface it by saying there's unit rates for length, like per kilometer of watercourse. So there's documents that provide industry rates for consulting services, as well as the conservation authorities did a similar analysis per unit or per kilometer length. So to do the whole watershed over 4 years, if it was a consulting rate, it would be in the ballpark of $3 million. We figure, because we have an engineering certificate of approval from Professional Engineers Ontario, we do a lot of this type of work in-house. We've also prepared a lot of the digital terrain models for the watershed, so we feel we could do it for in the order of about 1.5 to 1.6. That's for the whole watershed. But we're still refining those costs, and we expect them that we'll probably be able to reduce that a bit further. So for Hamilton Township, and I've sent some of these numbers to Lucas. I think it was actually brought that with me. Yeah, what our initial estimate was for all of the water courses in Hamilton Townships, it's in the ballpark of about 550 over 4 years. So if we are able to match that with 50%, that's 225 over 4 years. So it's a big help to get the federal dollars to do this work.
You have to have that commitment for the 50/50 to get that funding then?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, okay, so we're gonna be looking at reserves then over the 4 years to match those funds so that you can get the overall fund from the government.
Yes, that's one option, and it also depends on the priorities that the staff here have for updates. I know all of the water courses are old and we don't have models for them, but you know, maybe we don't do all of them if there is a challenge there. But I think that's a discussion we'll have to have with the staff, just to see what are the priorities, what is feasible over the next 4 years.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mark, please.
Quick question, Corey. Back to the funding. Is that going to be due at the end of 4 years, or does that have to be done as each project carries through?
You mean when the funding comes back?
No, I'm saying that, like, if we owe, let's say you mentioned we may owe 220 or 240,000, let's say 60,000 a year. Will we have 4 years to pay that off? Or is it due as you complete the projects within our municipality?
So we have actually a couple of projects underway now. And it's basically, it can be spread out and phased over multiple years. So it's not all required up front. If there's a project schedule that's agreed to by the funders, then we would just follow that. So we would try to work it in with the annual municipal budgets. And that's one of the things, these application windows open at times of the years that don't respect the municipal budget cycle. So yeah, it would basically just be phased over the 4 years, and there is some flexibility there, but it's just pay as the work's being done. It's not all required up front. Welcome.
Any other questions for Corey? John, please.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. It's very good. Just to build on what Councillor Lovsham was saying, and the fact is, after this is all taking place and everything is done, all your work, etc., then the process of now building or repairing takes place. How is that going to be funded?
Through you, Jarrett, you mean repairing structures? I think the value in this work of updating is it helps us understand where the risk is highest, and that can then inform capital forecasts for prioritizing what structures should be updated to minimize risk, not only for the road but for any properties that are affected upstream. So that would just be integrated into, you know, asset management planning in the long term. We also would use this for emergency management planning to know what roads are actually going to be usable in a flood. So there's a lot of stuff a lot of value that can come out of it at the end of the day. But to answer your question, it's really informing the asset management process.
Very good, thank you.
Thanks, Corey. I'm one person that was probably in this organization back in the spring of 1980, when that flood occurred. And the alternate plans and emergency plans weren't as developed in those days as we even have now, let alone moving forward. And I remember the failures that occurred on an ongoing basis there for several days in a row. So, I think back to one item with the number of automobiles that ended up down at the harbor in Port Hope that followed the water down. Anyway, thanks, Corey. I appreciate the information.
Thank you.
We do need a motion to receive the presentation, please. Larry, yes? Mark, seconder. Any questions or comments? All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. Our next two items on our agenda, being 5.2 and 5.3, have been withdrawn. So we can bounce directly to 5.4, Communications Tower from Spectra Point. Do we have a presenter with us or on Zoom today? Zoom?
Excuse me. Yes, Mr. Mayor, my name is Chris Leggett. And I'm ready
Chris, we
to.
think you're presenter with us or on Zoom.
Excuse me. Yes.
Chris, just stay with us for a second. We can get through a couple of technicalities here. Chris, the floor is yours, and I hope we don't have a time lag between your presentation and the voice when we're hearing it. Please continue, Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, we might still have some technical components here, Chris.
Understand.
Maybe you want to give us a bit of a test before you get halfway through your presentation.
Can you hear me?
I think we're aligned here now. Yes, Chris.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Thank you, council and staff, for the opportunity to attend today's committee meeting as a delegation on behalf of Rogers and Eorn, to follow up on a previous presentation that we made regarding the proposed telecommunications tower in Gore's Landing. At that previous presentation, there were a number of questions that we took away, and we're pleased to return today with some answers for you. And so I believe council is familiar with the Eorn program, so perhaps I won't take too much time to reiterate those details, but it's a program that's partially funded by the federal government and the province and Rogers Communication to improve wireless coverage in areas of the province that have poor service at the moment, essentially to try and bridge the digital divide. And so today's discussion specifically is about a tower proposed in the Gore's Landing community on a piece of property that's known as Lot 16, Concession 9 in the township. If I could see the next slide, please. This is the location of the proposed self-support structure on the property. I'll just take a moment for that to be digested. And yes, thank you. We can go to the next page. So I think during the last meeting, the primary line of questioning was regarding another application to the south, I think approximately 6 or 7 kilometers to the south, known as C7772, in the Cold Springs area. And I think there were 2 questions about that. One is, would Rogers be locating on the tower to the south in Cold Springs? The answer to that question is yes. There was some confusion, and I apologize for that during the previous meeting, but I have confirmed with Rogers that they intend to locate both on that proposed tower and at the tower known as C6505 in the Gores Landing area. So wanted to clarify that and speak a little bit as well regarding the need for both sites. And so some of the slides that we have in our presentation today, I think will speak to that. So this particular tower, C6505, it really has 2 primary objectives in terms of coverage. The first is to provide quality, in building coverage to the settlement area of Gores Landing. And the second is to provide a good outdoor and in-car portable coverage to the rest of the coverage cell, which would have a radius of a few kilometers in each direction. So if we could advance to the next slide, please. So this is a RF propagation map that shows the existing conditions in the township in the area of the 2 sites that we're discussing. And the white areas are very poor coverage. Would be difficult to place a call or access the internet in those areas at this time. It may be possible, but there would be significant limitations in terms of the performance of the service in those areas. Red is slightly better, and the yellow indicates that there would be good on-street coverage. So if you were standing outside, not in a car or not in a building, you would have good coverage. The light green areas indicate good coverage inside of a vehicle, and light blue indicates areas where there would be good but not great in building coverage. Certain buildings, such as concrete structures, would probably have limited coverage in the light blue area, for instance. You also may not get good signal in a basement, for instance, in the light blue, but there would be some in building coverage. And the dark blue is closer to the benchmark in building coverage. You probably would have fairly good service in the dark blue area, regardless of what type of structure that you were in. So that gives you an idea of what the colors represent. You can see that we've indicated the locations of the 2 towers, 6505, which we're here today specifically to discuss, but also the tower to the south that council had asked us about. And you can see that those areas basically have no in-building coverage. So if we may take a look at the next slide, please. So this is a simulation of the performance of the 2 sites once they're deployed. So with respect to 6505, you can see that there's a significant improvement to the settlement area of Gores Landing for in-building coverage, which is one of the key critical objectives of the site. Additionally, it also improves the quality of in-car portable coverage and outdoor coverage in the area. In those areas, in addition to just having better coverage, there would also be significantly improved capacity. because each cell site has a limited capability to provide simultaneous access to the network. And so in areas where there is more population, for instance, in the summer months when there are more people in the area, it would be challenging without this site to provide access, even in areas where there are service. So this map, I think, depicts how improved the coverage would be when the tower is deployed. I think it also highlights the need for both of these sites because it shows that the in-building coverage is limited to a relatively small radius out from the tower. And so I believe that the site to the south, which we are obviously not representing Rogers for, but I believe that that area would experience significantly better in-building coverage that's shown in blue. And there's a significant difference in terms of distance between these two areas that require service. And so that is why they are both needed at this time. And so this is a photo simulation looking from the Harris Boatworks boat storage yard, southeast, approximately 670 meters away from the proposed tower facility. I believe there's a second photo sim on the next page. So this is a second photo sim, approximately 1.4 kilometers looking west at the proposed tower facility from Lou Harris Road. And in conclusion, you know, I think the information that we've provided, I hope the information we provided has answered some of the questions that council and staff had about the two sites and the need for them both. So thank you for your time, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Chris. I'll turn to our council members. Do we have any questions? Larry, please.
Thanks, Chris. It's in my estimation, my own private estimation, that this is absolutely necessary for us to be able to communicate. Just a question, you take a look at C6505 and the radius that you indicate, and then you look over to the right or to the east, you'll see TM47L and C4121 on your map, on that map. Yes. So there
Yes.
seems to be, with two towers, there seems to be a greater radius for coverage. Is that correct? Because there's two towers there?
Are you referring to the tower?
To the immediately to the east, along the top there,
Right.
TM47L and C412-1.
No, that is one tower. There's the C code, C4121, would have been the code utilized by the planning staff at Rogers who would have issued the search map. And that's a code that they give out for search maps. The TM code represents some internal operational information. So it isn't two separate towers. They're the same thing. The reason you don't see TM codes on 6505 and 7772 is they haven't been deployed yet.
So that radius that you're seeing there, now there's the Rogers Tower and there's also the Bell Tower in that location in Gore's Landing, right? So if you...
That is correct, yeah.
So would that not include a larger radius there with the Bell and Rogers Towers?
The information that is depicted on this map is strictly Rogers performance metrics. It is not showing the performance metrics of other cellular companies. Those would differ depending on what type of equipment Bell might have on their tower and how they're operating it. You know, typically the carriers have different needs based on the number of subscribers that they have in an area and where the proximity of their existing surrounding infrastructure is located. It's not the case, of course, that they all locate on the same towers, so they have different needs in terms of the proximity for proposed new facilities in relation to existing facilities. So it is the case that Rogers is over there to the east on that site, and that, you know, the reason that we show the performance of the surrounding sites in the area is to give some context, you know, for what's going on in the broader community in terms of performance.
Okay, and just one other clarification for my own clarification is you indicate in Cold Springs C772, but on September 19th, in the report that we had, C7733 was indicated for September 19th. Is that a different tower than the one that was in that report, C7733?
Well,
I don't know if it relates to the location or what.
I believe those are two separate projects that are being deployed by Rogers. I think 7733 is likely operational and installed. 7772 is proposed. However, we're not the company providing service to Rogers for the deployment of that particular site. I believe that's a different company, and so I don't have a lot of information about that particular site, other than we wanted to include the performance information for it on this mapping, so that we could properly respond to the question from the mayor and council regarding the need for both these sites.
Yes, I understand that, and I agree that we do need that site in Gore's Landing or Cold Springs. I was just confused about which tower we're talking about. It's the shared services tower that's going to be placed on Bowman Road. Is that correct? Some staff, I guess.
I believe it is SNC who's working on the site 7772. As I said, I don't have any information about 7733. Other than I believe that's an existing site that is currently in operation and already been deployed, is my understanding.
Okay, well, maybe it's a little confusing on our part.
It shows on our map, 7733 went directly south.
Yeah, but that's not the one that was in the report in September. Yeah, I see it there. But on the report that we got for Cold Springs, the Bowman site, they called it 7733.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I was a bit confused about, no, I know the issue is that we're going to try to understand the Gore's Landing issue, and which I believe this is what we should keep to. It's just that we keep getting confused with some of this stuff. So anyway, we can talk to staff about that afterwards. So anyway, thank you. Appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
Any other questions for Chris from our council members? Chris, I have one, and I don't mean to prolong it too terribly long, but just for 100% clarity, the tower at Gore's Landing, being a 6505 unit, will in fact be Rogers, and at this point in time, Rogers only, and will be providing an improved level of service for both cellular and internet. End of question.
That is correct, sir. That is correct. It will allow for significant improvement for mobile portable devices. It will also allow people to sign up for in-home internet service through Rogers mobile network. They offer a service, I believe it's called Ignite, I think there's a promotion now, $60 a month or something. You'd have to go to their website, but absolutely, it will cover both types of services. That's correct.
And also, for 100% clarity, if there was another carrier or you were contracting with another carrier, the towers that we're speaking about today will not improve their service. Is that correct?
It would not improve the service for any other wireless operator unless they installed their equipment on this proposed tower 6505. If Freedom Mobile or TELUS or ExploreNet or some other wireless operator came along and wanted to install their equipment on this tower, they would absolutely be welcomed. Rogers would be pleased to allow them to co-locate. The structure is tall enough to allow that. And so that opportunity exists. I'm not aware at this time of any other carrier that has inquired about deploying their equipment on the site. Typically, those inquiries don't come in until a structure is built. So, at the moment, unfortunately, the bell tower was simply too short and is essentially a single carrier tower because of the height of it. But this proposed tower would be suitable for multiple carriers. Rogers will be deploying their equipment on it, subject to an endorsement from council. But there's every opportunity someone else could come along and utilize this structure.
Chris, just one follow-up. The tower construction, the actual structural components of it, will be designed to place additional equipment, no matter whose, will be constructed in such a fashion it will physically, structurally take other equipment other than what's on the table today. Is that correct?
Absolutely. That is correct. Quite a significant amount of additional equipment. The self-supporting structure is the most robust structure that you can deploy in terms of supporting additional weight and wind loading through the structure. So this is a robust structure with a significant amount of additional structural capacity to carry multiple carriers, not just one additional one. You could probably put quite a few on this structure type.
Thank you. And my last question, during your last presentation here, we soon realized there was a necessity of some clarification. You've gone through that with us, and we thank you for that. In addition, though, we did have public members here with us, and I sensed that they had concern. Have you adequately addressed any public input at this time?
Well, I would say that we've done our best to professionally respond to questions. We remain available for members of the public to reach out to us at any time if they have additional questions. It would be potentially self-serving for me to describe our responses as adequate, because that's subjective in terms of who's asking those questions. But we do our best to respond. It's particularly challenging for us to respond to questions and concerns about health and safety and property values because of the way the federal public consultation guidelines are structured, and the fact that it is Health Canada that regulates these facilities in terms of health and safety. And we are not professional doctors and scientists, but we do our very best, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I'll just turn to council again. Any follow-up questions? Bruce, please.
Just one for clarification, because I'm confused, because there are two towers in Gore's Landing right now. Am I not mistaken? There's one on Blue Harris Road. That's a bell tower, I understand. There's another one right behind Kelly Road, which would, by the look of this map, be within a stone's throw from the proposed tower. I know there's not a tower there, there's lights on. I just wonder whose tower that is and what it does. Are you aware of that tower?
I am not aware of any other tower other than the bell tower that's on that's in relative close proximity to our proposed facility. We, certainly researched the area and I believe identified all the structures in the area and assessed whether they were suitable. But if staff would like to provide us with some specific information in terms of the location of that facility, we'll take a look at it and get back to you with some, with some information, but I'm unaware of it right now off the top of my head.
Bruce, I'll turn to you. Are you okay if we refer that question and thought process to our own staff at this time?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that's it, Chris. And once again, thank you. It's been a little bit of a long drawn out process, but I can see why it's been necessary to have a subsequent meeting from our first, where I think we were all heading in different directions with a lot of challenges and questions. So I again, thank you, Chris.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for your time today. Look forward to working with council and staff to improve service in the area.
I believe it would be appropriate if we have a motion to receive the presentation. Moved by Bruce, seconded by John. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 6 is our closed session, and that is non-existent today.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, would you mind asking our senior planner if that motion to receive is sufficient at this time?
I'll consider that already asked and wait for the answer.
Sorry, Daphne. You were asking if the motion to receive is sufficient? Because because they requested additional information with respect to the tower on Kelly Road?
Because it seemed as though the delegation was requesting endorsement by council. So just for clarity, we've received the information.
And it's my understanding the report is coming to council next week for council's consideration.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
I take it we're well positioned then for today. Next item of business is adjournment. And it's 1:48. Would anyone like to make the motion for adjournment, please? Moved by Mark, seconded by Larry. All those in favor? Carried. See you in a few.